What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Alexander Payne's new movie, The Holdovers, starring Paul Giamatti, which is playing in limited release right now and will be opening wide on November 10th. Now, before I say anything else, if you've been following my channel for any stretch of time, you'll probably recognize or be aware of the fact that I am prone to hyperbole. I tend to run very hot or very cold on movies, and very rarely do I say anything in between. But in spite of the fact that I was kind of indifferent toward this movie going into it, I mean, I'd seen the trailer, it looked kind of interesting, but much to my surprise, this is a very strong contender for my favorite movie of 2023. I absolutely fucking loved it, and in a few months' time, after people have had a chance to see it, digest it, discuss it, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, like, people in their late teens and early 20s, that some of them come to regard this as, like, you know, one of their favorite movies. The same way a lot of people will read like Catcher in the Rye in, like, their high school years and completely fall under its spell. Or let me modify that. If anybody in their late teens or early 20s is even aware of this movie, I think it has a very good chance of really getting its hooks into them. So this is me taking my turn to bang the drum on the movie's behalf and just let people know that this movie even fucking exists. And the premise is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Set in the early 1970s, the film follows Paul Hunnam, a disliked teacher at Barton Academy, who's responsible for supervising students who are unable to return home for the Christmas holidays. During this process, Hunnam is forced to deal with one particularly rebellious but troubled student, Angus, who is grieving the loss of his father. And if that sounds to you like every other bland, generic coming-of-age drama that you've ever heard of, I think that's totally fair. But what's remarkable about this movie is how, you know, every single trap that this movie might potentially fall into for nostalgia or sentimentality or melodrama, or just obvious storytelling choices, what's amazing is how at every single turn this movie kind of deftly avoids falling into those traps. And I think that falls on the shoulders of director Alexander Payne, who at this point, I think he's prepared to give us some of the best movies of his career. I mean, I love Election, and like everybody, I like Sideways. He's a damn good director with a damn good track record. But I think in the hands of 99 out of 100 filmmakers, The Holdovers would be the most unwatchable, obvious, just nausea-inducing, syrupy melodrama that you could ever conceive of. And I think a big part of the secret sauce for why this movie is so effective is that it recognizes that the holidays, for a lot of people, is a time of melancholy, it's a time of depression, it's a time of sadness, stress. Like, there are some people out there where Christmas is their favorite time of the year, and they just get almost like this frenzied look in their eyes. It's like they're buying presents for everybody and like sending out Christmas cards, and they just get totally like in the grip of Christmas fever, listen to shitty Christmas music, watch shitty Christmas movies, like the kind of movies that take shortcuts to deliver those saccharine, overly sweet experiences that just make me just want to projectile vomit in all directions. But this movie, this is one of those movies that's going to be the new favorite Christmas movie for people who hate Christmas. And I did a video last year on my top 10 Christmas movies for people who hate Christmas. And people in the comments like, what do you mean? How do you hate Christmas? And all I'll say to that is, there are few things more annoying to people who hate Christmas than people who have absolute blinders on about the holiday and why it might be a time where people just like go into the darkest mood imaginable. Like for me, my least favorite time of the year is Thanksgiving and New Year's, and then I kind of come out of my funk. So if, like me, you're one of those people that hates all the superficial bullshit that's associated with that loathsome holiday, there's a very good chance that you're going to fucking love The Holdovers. And like many aging movie fans, I'm turning into one of those curmudgeons that's always asking the question, how come they don't make movies like they used to? But here's the deal. If you don't vote with your eyeballs and your dollars for good movies, well, then people will continue to make the shitty movies. So The Holdovers is one of those movies that feels like it's channeling the essence and the spirit of the late 60s and early 70s, but without imitating the style or without like ripping it off. It doesn't feel retro. It doesn't feel like a pale imitation. It doesn't feel derivative, but somehow it manages to channel the spirit of old school filmmakers like Hal Ashby, Mike Nichols, Arthur Penn, like a lot of those late 60s, early 70s new Hollywood directors. And I think Hal Ashby is probably the best comp for this. Movies like Harold and Maude, movies like Shampoo, movies like Being There, where there's laughs and there's heart and there's humanity. But there's also melancholy and sadness and well-earned emotions. That's an expression you're going to hear me use a lot in this video. There's a difference between taking a shortcut to like a really sugary, sweet, unearned emotion and a movie that just delivers like a devastating scene of incredible emotional power, But you got to lay the groundwork. You got to do the work. You got to lay the foundation to make those beats actually play. And as much as Alexander Payne obviously deserves a lot of credit for this movie not getting lost in nostalgia, we also have to give a shout out to writer David Hemmingson, who manages that rare feat of writing teenagers in a convincing, compelling fashion. I feel like so many screenwriters get absolutely lost or completely implode when trying to write in the voice of children or teens. They either turn them into these like little monsters that deserve to just be thrown off a bridge just to get them out of the gene pool, or they write them like adults in teenage bodies. But somehow David Hemmingson, he's able to write teenagers with like this eerie intensity. And I had some incredible flashbacks while watching this, because this movie's set in a New England boarding school in the winter. I did not attend a New England boarding school, but I did attend a traditional all-male boarding school in the South, Woodbury Forest School in Virginia. I was there from 1991 to 1995. And there are a lot of movies that are set in all-male boarding schools. Very rarely do they get the tone right. And for like the first 20, 30 minutes, you really get to settle into this environment and this locale. And I was just staggered by how well they got it right. Like every time the kids spoke to one another, I was like, oh my God, like did y'all just like put microphones in like some kids' dorms and like just record the way kids speak, but also the way that the students and the teachers interact with one another? Because what's different about a boarding school from a traditional high school is that you live together. It's like this little village or this little community of a couple hundred people. And so it's like a small town that's almost completely, totally cut off from the outside world. And so everybody gets like overly familiar with one another. And there's some classroom scenes here where Paul Giamatti is talking so much shit to his students.
I can tell by your faces that many of you are shocked at the outcome. I, on the other hand, am not, because I have had the misfortune of teaching you this semester. And even with my ocular limitations, I witnessed firsthand your glazed, uncomprehending expressions.
But that's the way it gets. Like when your teachers live down the hall from you in their apartments, you stop talking to them like teachers in a classroom. You start talking to them like your family. And that's one of those things this movie really nailed. And what's hard to put into words is how you're in these classroom environments where the students talk to their teachers almost like mean older siblings, but they're mean older siblings that have the power to give you demerits and detentions and send you to demerit hall and that sort of thing. And that's what this movie is all about. These poor kids who are stuck on campus over the holidays with this teacher that they absolutely fucking despise. And he's an excellent teacher. He teaches ancient civilization. He takes his job very seriously. And he's just absolutely ruthless about kind of like the glazed expressions that he's always met with in the classroom as the kids just are utterly failing to comprehend what he's trying to teach them. But what makes it additionally interesting is that all these kids are the children of incredibly powerful people. I shouldn't say all these kids. Most of these kids are the children of senators and politicians and incredible businessmen, where if you disrupt a child's chances to go to Yale, Cornell, Harvard, etc., because you gave them a C- on a paper, well, there might be consequences. You might have a very powerful parent yelling at the school, which in turn puts pressure on the teacher. And so Paul Giamatti as a teacher is in this really kind of precarious position where he's taking great delight in kind of abusing some of these spoiled brats while at the same time recognizing there might be very real and dire consequences. And the consequence for him, and when the story begins, is that he is going to have to supervise the holdovers. Which brings me full circle to actor Dominic Cessa, who is appearing in his first movie. This is his screen debut, and very rarely do directors get the opportunity to make a fresh discovery. Alexander Payne in like 10, 20, 30 years from now is going to be the guy who's credited as discovered Dominic Cessa. But I think this is the arrival of a major new acting talent. He's incredibly bright. He's got incredible sensitivity, but in spite of being incredibly sensitive, he's also not afraid to talk a little bit of shit. I think that's another thing that a lot of writers get wrong when writing teenagers. They either make them like the bully or the nerd, like they resort to all these cheesy stereotypes. There's no stereotype that captures Dominic Cessa's character, and his character's name is Angus Tully. And what impressed me most about him was that he was able to spar with Paul Giamatti. Paul Giamatti, I mean, he's been acting in movies for decades at this point, has a giant filmography filled with incredible performances. I mean, he's a major acting talent. And oftentimes you'll find when you've got an incredibly experienced actor with an inexperienced actor, you get these kind of lopsided scenes that feel out of balance, where almost like the experienced actor will have to kind of lift the scene and kind of overact a little bit. But these two actors, they're adversarial, but they also bond. They talk trash. There's tears. There's like knockdown, drag out brawls. Like it's a real relationship, and it's so genuine and so sincere and so authentic. And as the relationship takes its course, and I'm not going to spoil like where things go, but toward the end of the movie, I just found myself getting waves of chills up my neck and back, where I realized I was watching like a classic movie unfold before our eyes. Like when I got to the end of the movie, and they were kind of shaking hands and sharing their final words, it's like, did I just see like a new classic come into being? Like, is this like a masterpiece of character-driven dramas? And once again, I am prone to hyperbole. I will need to revisit the movie, but I just sat there feeling like waves of pleasure, because this is one of those rare movies where never once in the entire running time did I roll my eyes with like disgust. And that's something that happens with most movies, where there's like a line that feels inauthentic, or there's a beat that feels unearned, or I'm like, ugh, like gross, this movie fucking sucks, and it just like ruins the whole experience. There wasn't a single shot, there wasn't a single beat, there wasn't a single scene where I'd want it to go bye-bye. Like the whole movie feels complete, and that is such a rare, wonderful, beautiful thing. Also, let me issue a warning to Dominic Cessa, if he's not already aware of the fact. There's a good chance that some young ladies out there, after they see this movie, are just going to eat him alive, just tear him to pieces. Like this is one of those roles where like he could be the next Timothée Chalamet or Leonardo DiCaprio, like the next 20-something man who is kind of androgynous looking but still masculine enough, where like girls are like, oh my God, I must have him, and I must have him now. He should start walking around wearing Kevlar, because the girls are going to be coming for him. And let's just say the next couple of years of his life are going to be very interesting.
Are you trying to lick down my shirt?
No. Yes.
And going back to that old phrase, like, how come they don't make movies like they used to? This is one of those movies. It's smart entertainment for adults, and it knows how to explore complex topics with subtlety, knows how to explore complex ideas with nuance. And with like an elite boarding school like this, obviously you're dealing with like massive wealth disparity and issues of class and issues of race, and all these topics. Most filmmakers explore them in the most clumsy fashion imaginable, where they come across as preachy, they come across as obvious, they come across as heavy-handed. This is one of those movies that trusts in the audience to think for themselves, to be an adult, to be able to understand complex ideas without having to constantly spell out for the audience what they're supposed to think every step of the way. Because the other major character in this drama is the character of Mary Lamb, played by Divine Joy Randolph. And the first time I saw Divine Joy Randolph was in the show The Idol. I know a lot of people hate The Idol. I kind of enjoyed The Idol, but she was really good in The Idol. She's astonishing in this, and she plays this incredibly sympathetic character where she works at this school as a cook, and she's one of the only other employees that's staying on campus during the holidays. But one of the reasons she works at this school is because she wanted to give her son an opportunity to be educated at an elite boarding school, but because she's poor, rather than going to college right after he graduated, he enlisted and went to Vietnam, and she is still very much in mourning over the fact that her son died while fighting overseas. And so she is just, racked with sadness. And like for her, Christmas is the most depressing holiday imaginable, because this is her first Christmas in the absence of her son. And so you have this unlikely trio where Dominic Cessa, Divine Joy Randolph, and Paul Giamatti, three characters who are all wrestling with their own personal emotional burdens, where they're trying to give each other something that resembles a proper holiday, all while constantly talking shit with each other and getting in fights. And it was just an incredible experience watching these three characters interact throughout the movie, especially when you see Divine Joy Randolph's character going to bat for some of these kids who attend this school, because Paul Giamatti's character, he basically has the attitude that every single child that attends this school is a spoiled, entitled, like reprobate, and he is well within his rights just to abuse them mercilessly at every available opportunity. And when he'll say things like, all these kids are born into privilege, blah, 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 and the character played by Divine Joy, but like, you don't know that. Like the story can be deeper for all these characters, no matter what their background might be, as we learn with the character of Angus Tully time and time again, because even his story, as described in the official synopsis, has a lot of curveballs and a lot of interesting twists and turns throughout the story. And I said it before and I'll say it again, but this movie consistently surprised me at every turn, where every time I thought I knew where the plot was going, it would just kind of very subtly shift in another direction, like the love interest of Paul Giamatti. Like they introduce her early on, and in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, you would know exactly where that story is going to go. But the movie surprised me on that front, and it was just such a relief to see that there are still interesting directors out there who know how to make these movies, once again, without like imitating the style of the late 60s and early 70s, but embracing the spirit of those movies. It's one of those movies as rich and textured and detailed as like a really good novel. Like there's a great novel out there about boarding school called A Separate Piece, where every single kid who goes to boarding school ends up being assigned a separate piece at one point. But because this movie's so authentic and so heartfelt and so sincere, and you know, anytime you might cry or feel joy, because it's so well earned, it makes you see through all the transparent bullshit that's used in other lesser movies in order to try to manipulate your emotions. And I don't think it's one of those movies that's only going to appeal to people who've been sent away to a single-sex environment, in a rural environment, for 4 years. I mean, I don't want to turn this video into a giant review of what it was like to be at a single-sex school for 4 years out in the country from age 15 to 18. But there's so many little details that are absolutely hysterical, like kids constantly being threatened with being sent to Fork Union Military Academy if they get kicked out. And that was a very real threat for a lot of the kids when I was in boarding school, where it's like, if you get thrown out of here, you're going to Fork Union. And Fork Union, if you don't know what it is, it's a military school where, once again, all single-sex boarding school. But everybody that I ever met that went to Fork Union said, oh yeah, for like the first year or two, I pretty much cried myself to sleep every single night. So we all lived in terror about being sent to Fork Union. And sure enough, in this movie, you see kids being threatened by their parents, being sent to Fork Union. I was like, oh my God, like this writer, he really knows whereof he speaks. But I think the reason this movie will play for everybody is that it explores universal themes. Like, there's nothing more universal than the idea of a kid who is unwanted during the holidays who's not going to get to go home. I mean, that just immediately your heart's going to go out to him. And it's emphasized very heavily in the trailer when Divine's character is like, what's wrong with you? Like telling a boy he's not wanted after his parents have basically told him he's not wanted over the holidays. It's some pretty brutal, ruthless stuff. But I feel like no matter where you're from, no matter what your background might be, that is an emotion you can relate to. And just to shower some additional praise on this movie, it avoided a trap that I've noticed a lot of contemporary movies falling into, where it avoided any weird anachronisms that don't feel at place in a movie set in 1970. I've seen this a lot recently, where shows and movies that are set at some point in the past, but you'll have characters speaking in a way as if they're like the mouthpiece for a screenwriter from 2023. And I feel like there's nothing more lazy and there's nothing more just unimaginative than a screenwriter or a filmmaker trying to make a period movie with like the knowledge and wisdom that they feel like they've accumulated in the modern age, where they're almost kind of like wagging their finger in disapproval at that period. If not for the fact that this movie is obviously shot with like modern technology, you could easily see this movie being shot and like basically being released in 1970. But at the same time, it feels very refreshingly modern. It's almost a miracle that they were able to kind of walk that tightrope where it's a period movie that feels and looks like a modern movie without using any anachronisms that wouldn't feel like they belong in this story. There's no bullshit in this movie reinterpreting the story for modern audiences, whatever the fuck that means. Like when you break the verisimilitude of a movie or a show, it's very hard to get that back. I was completely, totally under the spell of this movie, laughing, smiling, having a fucking blast from start to finish. So much so that when the movie ended, I reached out to my sophomore year English teacher, Ben Hale, and just said, hey, this is a movie that you need to see. Like, everybody from this environment is going to get a lot of laughs out of this. And I even sent him a screenshot of one of my old English papers that I wrote when I was 16 years old. My mother recently found a bunch of my papers with all of his comments. And he was one of those teachers that was unafraid to talk a little shit and let his students know just how glazed their expressions might be at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. And I'm about to start getting misty even talking about this. But anyway, this movie had a very powerful emotional impact on me. It gets my highest possible recommendation. I don't know if everybody's going to regard it the same way, but Alexander Payne, he's been making good movies for a long time now, and I think it's for a lot of people, this is going to represent a fresh career high, which is not all that common for a director who, how old is he? I think he's born in 1961. He's 62 years old. Not a lot of directors deliver their best work in their 60s, but goddamn, Alexander Payne, he has not lost a step in his talents as a director. And luckily, I still have a few movies by him that I'm eager to see. Like, I did not want to see Downsizing. And there's absolutely nothing about Downsizing back in 2017 that appealed to me in any way, shape, or form. maybe I'll have to go back and revisit it. But yeah, as much as I love The Holdovers, I don't know if I can bring myself to see Downsizing, but I might have to go back and revisit a few things like Sideways or About Schmidt or Election. I mean, Election, I cannot emphasize it enough. If you want to see just a razor-sharp comedy from the 90s that represents kind of, that 90s Gen X sensibility, Election is an absolute home run. Never saw Citizen Ruth from 1996. That might be his first feature film, although I know he did some work for Playboy in 1991. He directed a segment called My Secret Moments in the 1991 movie Inside Out. I might have to have a look at that as well, but I'm not expecting that to be as good as The Holdovers. But one last thing before I wrap up this video, just so I don't go this whole video without offering one piece of criticism to the entire movie: needle drops. I would say the majority of the needle drops in this movie are razor sharp, right on point, exactly what you'd expect. But there was one needle drop by Cat Stevens. I was like, you know what? I've heard that song in too many movies. Nobody can use this song anymore. I'm sorry. It's just like, it makes you immediately think of like Wes Anderson movies as opposed to an Alexander Payne movie. So that would be my one very, very mild criticism, is that there was one song where I was like, you're making me think about another movie right now. But the music was incredible. It was just an overall an incredibly powerful emotional experience, and I cannot wait to watch it again, and I can't wait to see how people respond as the movie starts going into a wider release. At any rate, I think I have vomited enough compliments on this movie for the time being. I'm almost embarrassed that I let myself get so kind of swept away in my praise for it, but it was that powerful. And so, yeah, I think I have found my favorite movie of 2023, or who knows, maybe between now and New Year's. My least favorite time of the year. Something else might push it aside, but I'm totally satisfied that I found my favorite movie of the year, unless something else comes along. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm starting to ramble at this point. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax if you want to talk more about the career of Alexander Payne. I hope I've put this movie on some people's radar, and let me know what you think about it when you get a chance to see it. But I hope everybody has a great week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.